Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Emma Explores with Emma Cox, who is, as many of you know, a professional genealogist out of England and also well known for her Journeys into Genealogy podcast. Each week, or rather each month, she joins us with another slice of the work that she's been doing in her own family research, which gives us, I think, a lot of insight and perspective into the different ways to be capturing these stories, things to be looking for, and special bits of insight. As we get started today, I did want to make a slight note about a change that I've made in the configuration of our Zoom materials and deference to privacy. As many of you know, I've been working on a little side hustle here with Robin Stewart for something we're calling Mission Genealogy, which you'll find at missiongenealogy.org. And as part of Mission Genealogy, we will be hosting a roundtable, our launch event, our open house next week on August 20th on Tuesday. And it has had me a lot more sensitive about privacy. And I want to make sure that everyone who speaks and joins our programs always feels comfortable, in particular to comfort in sharing things that can be a little awkward and family stories and whatnot. So you're very welcome to keep your video on or off as you prefer. And in those kinds of sessions, we'll be especially cautious about that. In these sessions, actually, I've made these as standards now going forward for all of our programs. So things like the listing of who is here and the listing of names as they come in on the recording. And you always have the ability to change your name as it appears on the screen, hide your last name, for example, if you'd like, or anything else. If you see some tips on things you'd rather we do, I'm all ears. I'm always happy to consider these things as we go forward to be sensitive. I want everybody to be comfortable here in where we're going. And one more little plug while I'm here, if you haven't already seen it. Projectkin is a co-sponsor with the Society of Genealogists in a program starting in September, all about that place. All about that place is really celebrating the idea of one place studies, looking at place as you do characters in your family history drama. And I'm thrilled actually with us today is Cynthia Raleigh, who is going to be one of our speakers during the Projectkin sponsored Pacific edition of All About That Place. All About That Place has been largely centered in the UK with a programming running from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. London time, which 8 a.m. is midnight here in California, 8 hours behind. So we decided to host ours starting at midnight in London. It's only 1 hour long here, but it covers the Pacific time, which runs from 4 p.m. Pacific time here in California, all the way out to 7 a.m. in Western Australia. So it's also 7 p.m. on the US East Coast, but it gives us a way to present that idea to the other side of the planet. So again, thank you all for coming today. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful contributor, Emma Cox, for this fabulous ongoing series. And with that, over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm delighted to be here and to see a few familiar faces and meet some new people. Today, I'm going to be giving you another little slice of my own family history. So I'm going to start off with sharing my screen with you. So just give me one moment to do that. And then I'm going to start my presentation. So for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Emma Cox. I'm a family historian genealogist, a Huguenot descendant via my father's mother's side. But I'm not going to be talking about that side of the tree today. I'm going to be talking about my mother's side of the tree. And I help people. So I'm a genealogist myself, family historian. I find DNA fascinating. I love putting together family trees, books, charts, all sorts of things. And I even help people who want to come on a tour of England and want to find out more about the places their ancestors lived and worked. As Barbara mentioned, I've also got a podcast called Journeys into Genealogy, and I believe there are 92 episodes on there now. So I'm going to be celebrating my 100th episode a bit later on in the year. So we've something special planned for that. And there are lots of interviews on there and people with interesting family history stories. So today, we're going to start with Scotland. So there might be some words that you aren't familiar with here. So by all means, stop me or ask me in the questions at the end. I'll be very happy to answer anything with that there. And we've got a map on the right-hand side here. So this is actually in the northeast part of Scotland, and there's a place called Aberdeen, just on the right-hand side there. And I'm going to be talking about patterns in my family tree. So basically, what's a pattern? So a pattern is something that recurs, it's repeating, it's something that happens more than once. So, for example, it could be somebody who doesn't move very much, a family when they stick in the same place for several generations, and they might move around in that place. They might stay in the same town, or they might stay in the same county or something like that, but they basically stay in the same area. It could be if somebody works in the same industry. You hear about miners, for example, where you have several generations who all work in the mines. They don't necessarily do the same job, but they work in the same industry. Patterns could also be to do with physical characteristics or illnesses or things that you actually inherit from your ancestors. It could be that people die at similar ages. It might be that you find that on your one particular line of the family, they are not long lived and they are all maybe dead before the age of 70, for example. Today, we're going to focus on places. So I'm going to introduce you to a couple of places in Scotland and one of the industries that's involved, that my family was involved with. So this first place is called Montrose. And it's pronounced Montrose, and it's in a place which used to be called Kincardineshire, and now it's called Angus. So it's changed over the years. And on the screen here, towards the top, you can actually see, I'll just put my little laser pointer on. Just one moment. This is Aberdeen, with Montrose down the coast, and this is the railway line, and that railway line goes all the way down to Edinburgh, down in the south of Scotland. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about Montrose and about the history of the place and the family that actually live here. Montrose is a burh, a Scottish settlement under the protection of a castle, which usually had a marketplace and a widened high street or junction. So that basically means that it was a fairly important place. It was on the coast, so it had fishing, which was a very important industry in Scotland for many, many generations. And it was also a fairly large intersection between other places. I also wanted to show you maps, because maps are a great way of finding out more about what your ancestors' places used to look like. So this is an example of the split view map that's available on the National Library of Scotland. I'm just going to give you a demonstration of this, the screenshot there. We're just going to take you into it. And just a moment, turn off my screen pointer. And do that again. There we go. This is a really, really useful website. I did a talk for the Members Corner for Projectkin a while ago, and I used this to actually help find where my ancestors lived in London. So basically with this, you have total control over it. You can put two different maps, one on either side. And the really, really clever thing is if you move on one, it moves on the other. And it actually goes further and further in. And wherever you are, it moves with you. So you can see this is one that shows the OS Leisure map of current. This is what it looks like at the moment. And this one over here is an Ordnance Survey, 1 inch, around about 1885 to 1900 is the date on that one. And so you can see how much the town has and hasn't changed. And it gives you lots of information on here. You can see churches, you can see Rossi Island in there. I believe one of my other ancestors, I have different families who lived there, actually had a fishing business based on Rossi Island there. And so you can zoom in and out, you can put it into context, you can find place names, for example, that don't exist today. You can see them on older maps. It's a really useful way to actually look at the places that your ancestors used to be. And if you wanted to find out more about a town in Scotland, for example, there are various different websites you can go to. There's the National Records of Scotland, and they've got some very useful guides for research. So they'll give you ideas on how you can search different registers that are available here, and then you've got guidance on actually using the catalogues. And if you want to look, you can just search on it, you can go into browse, you can type in Montrose in this case and search, and these are the type of records that you get from it. So for example, the first one on the screen here is the Montrose and Arbroath Fishery Office records. You've got things to do with the railway. You've got Kirk sessions. Now, if anyone's not familiar with that, Kirk is a Scottish word for church. So if you see that appearing anywhere, Kirk means church. So you've got various different records relating to different places. You also might have records relating to specific people. So you can see there's various different records available on here. Lots to do with churches, and a lot of them aren't necessarily, they might mention Montrose in some way, but they're not necessarily all about Montrose. Another one that's well worth having a look at is Scottish indexes. So this is, if I search for a surname and I search for Japp, that's one of my Scottish ancestors, search all collections. And then it comes up with lots and lots of different things. The first one here is mental health admissions. So you can see the records for that. You can also see any things that were to do with legal cases, court of session records, prison registers, paternity cases. So if you have any illegitimate children. So for example, there's one here says that Alexander Japp, formerly in service there in 1869. So it's bound to be somebody who is part of my tree. Both of those people are. And deaths and burials, if someone's died suddenly. So that is a really, really good website to look at. And they will actually look for you. You can pay for extra searches on Scottish indexes. GENUKI is a brilliant website that covers the whole of Great Britain, so England, Ireland and Scotland. And you can put in searches in here, in Montrose again. And it comes up with some really old information. So you might find information here from a Gazetteer of Scotland, for example, from 1803. It will come up and tell you what churches are there. It'll see pictures that people have put on there, for example, from Geograph, and maps. So again, that's a really useful website. And then I mentioned Kirk, so Kirk session records. So basically the church kept records, and basically if people did anything wrong, then they were brought up and they had to basically admit their guilt, for example. So if someone had fathered an illegitimate child, they would have been brought in front of the Kirk session and the records would have been held in there. So that's just one of the things on Scotland's People, which is the main website for Scottish family history. And the Scottish Archive Network. So that was another link directly to the ones that I looked at for Montrose, but again, it's brought up some different ones here. So for example, we've got a translation of the Bible from 1612. So there's random information in these things, but it makes for fascinating reading when you do start looking through them. So I mentioned Japp as a family surname here. So it's not Scottish in origin. And I'm not actually 100% sure where it came from originally, but the furthest back that I know of it for the moment is this place, and I hope I pronounce it correctly. It's Hygge, or Hygge, in Denmark/Germany. So this is the line for Denmark around here, and Germany is just south of here. So this is what they call the Wadden Sea. So it's a little island here. And this came from the museum in Montrose. And actually I was sent this by a distant cousin in Canada who'd been up there and visited it and sent it through to me. And on here, you can see that this is dating from 1500 and saying that the people started off around here and they went to lots of different places. So you can see some people went to Lübeck in North Germany, some people are in Denmark, some people are in the Japsand are here. So there's two mentions of Japsand. This is a tiny little uninhabited island here, which is actually a nature reserve now. And then there's another Japsan down here. And then it says going to England. Well, actually, that's Scotland. And that says Montrose on that one there. So they have been in Montrose for quite a long time. The earliest I've traced them back to is around about 1610. So I've got 8 generations directly in this place, and they basically settled there. They created businesses. Those businesses remained through subsequent generations. And I created this table here. It's part of a spreadsheet, and basically it's just a good way of actually displaying information about the person. So for example, on here, I've got their surname, their maternal or paternal, and the starting person with that. So generation 1 is my great grandmother. Her name was Margaret, and then her father, and then it goes back subsequent generations, all born in Montrose, when they're born, how old the parents were when they were born, because that can be quite interesting and can actually throw up a few conundrums. Where they died, if they didn't die in the same place, and when they died, and how old they were when they died. And then towards the right-hand side here, I've also got occupation showing. So we've got 4 generations of furniture making, all living within Montrose. So there's a deep family connection to Montrose. And 10 miles from Lawrence Kirk. So you can see that my great-grandmother didn't move very far during her lifetime. And I actually have her diaries. I have some lovely little 5-year diaries, which are probably about 10 centimeters by about 5 centimeters, tiny, tiny handwriting dating from the 1950s and 1960s, where she talks about what she did as part of her daily life. She mentions putting out the washing. She mentions what the weather was like. She mentions getting a letter from my grandfather, who was running a tea plantation in Scotland at the time. And she carried on with those until she was actually, unfortunately, dying of cancer. And then she died, and her husband continued them after she died. And I've probably got about 10 different years worth of diaries of this tiny handwriting, which gives a lovely insight into her life then. And at some point, I want to actually transcribe them. And it's quite a labour of love to do all of that, but I will do it at some point. Again, there's a lot of information about Montrose, and one of the first places to start looking for something like that is the Aberdeen and North East Scotland Family History Society, ANESFHS, where memberships are very reasonable, £25 a year, and they publish lots and lots of different booklets and books. And this one is called The People of Montrose, 1700 to 99. And that was the ransom of £3. So a good investment here. And when I looked inside it, it gave me a lovely introduction into Montrose here, and said that it was a port, and there was timber, flax, tobacco, wine, fruit, salt, and miscellaneous manufactured goods. And it traded with countries all around the North Sea. So the Baltic, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and lesser extent North America and the West Indies, because they were on the other side. So you can see that Montrose was quite an important place in Scottish history a couple of hundred years ago. And I have one of my Jap ancestors. His name is Robert Jap, and it says he was born in 1724 and he died in 1807. There's also a Margaret Jap, who's a relict. She was a widow of Alexander Law, who was a skipper in Montrose. So he worked on a boat in Montrose. And a testament being a will and testament of 1795. I can't remember exactly how she fits in, but I'm fairly sure that she does. But Robert is one of my great-grandfathers. I don't know if you remember, he's my 5 times great-grandfather, and he's this one here. So it was quite fun to actually get the book and to see him mentioned in it. And I'm really, really, really fortunate that I have a lot of papers and other things that my grandfather collected over his lifetime. And there is this family tree. This is just a short extract showing the top of it. And I don't think it's 100% correct, because given that on the previous one, you can see that they were in Montrose at about 1669 and likely a lot earlier than that. On this one, it says that they came across around 1685. So they were in Scotland before that. So there's things in this which may not necessarily be correct, but it basically goes back to William Jap, who was preceptor in the family of John Erskine of Dun. So John Erskine was quite a famous clergyman in Scotland, a reformer. And then his son was a miller. And then his son, James Henry, he was a cabinet maker. And his grandson, James, was also a cabinet maker. So this was the start of the furniture making business, which was in Montrose for 4 generations. So it goes back to sort of 1830 odd, 1840s when it roughly started. And this carried on for quite a long time. And if you ever get a chance to look at newspaper archives, the British Newspaper Archive has some wonderful articles. So the first one we've got on the screen here is talking about the co-partnery carried on in Montrose under the firm of John and Francis Japp, cabinet makers and upholsterers, was this day dissolved by mutual consent. The business will in future be carried on in the same premises by the subscriber Francis Japp and James William Japp and Francis Mitchell Japp, sons of the subscriber John Japp, under the firm of Francis, James and Francis Japp. The new company is authorised to receive and discharge the outstanding debts and will settle all claims against the late firm. So you can see how the business is transferring, changing slightly, but just carrying on through the generations. And there were various other articles in there. I just picked that one out. And that's from 1847. Skipping forward a few decades, then we've got a couple of different articles from the 1880s, which still refer to the business. So the one on the right is actually slightly before the other one, and it's a special sale of valuable modern furniture, carpets, curtain materials, etc. In consequence of alterations on our premises and accumulation of goods from depression in trade, we have resolved to offer our whole stock at a reduction of from 10 to 50% for cash payments only. And genuine bargains in handsome pedestal sideboards in oak, mahogany and walnut, suites of dining room furniture in various styles, telescope tables, carpets, and so it goes on. And then a little later on, there's a special sale that they talk about where they have music cabinets, a walnut bagatelle table, so that was a gaming table, a harmonium, which is something like a piano, and various other things going on there. So this business carried on for many generations. And doing my research, I found that there was records of some of the things they have created being kept in some of the large houses within Scotland. So what we would call stately homes in this country. So the homes owned by the nobility, put it like that. And in 1959, there was an article in an Australian newspaper which referred to a painter in Melbourne who came from Montrose, and there was a clock. And it was believed to have been made about 1783. And he was lucky enough that the lady opened the clock, and inside it they found the name of John and Francis Japp of Montrose. And it was bought in the 1920s, and proved a perfect timekeeper. So from 1783 to 1959, that's pretty good going for a clock. This is mine. This is a piece of furniture that I've inherited. It's called a Davenport, and it's a small writing desk. So if you look at it, the flap at the front at the top opens, and also there's a flap at the top on the little extra bit at the top opens. The drawers on the left-hand side are false. They don't open, but the drawers on the right-hand side are false. And I use it for all my stationery, and I keep cards and all sorts of things in there. And I inherited this from my grandfather, who was very proud of the Davenport. And he used to love his typewriter. He typed up a lovely little description of how he came to have it via his mother. So I just wanted to read some of this out. So it's thought to be made by the firm of the Japps, who were brothers in Baltic Street and Montrose, furniture makers, belonged to his grandmother. So we've got a direct provenance that it came from her, Mary Cook Johnston, who married David Japp, and was his mother's favourite piece, and she determined to acquire it when the granny died around 1913-14. And he remembers that they travelled to the auction. This is my grandfather telling me that he travelled to this auction in a horse-drawn cab, and that there was competition to actually buy this, and that she ended up spending about 40 or 42 pounds to get it. And in those days, that was quite a lot of money. But she got it, and so it has come down the generations to us. And this lovely little letter that's shown on the screen here talks about the family of fish curers that I mentioned earlier on, the Johnstons. And then the Japps went and lived up on a farm near Inverness. And Beatty Lodge, I've got photographs of Beatty Lodge where my grandfather lived when he was young. And all three of us used to be sent there Saturdays to call on Granny, who was invalided, wore a white bonnet, i.e. lace type cap. So it's a lovely little insight into life in Scotland in the early 1900s there. So we're going to go to a second place now. So this place is called Kildrummy. And this is a tiny little place. So you can see we've got Aberdeen still here. We've got Montrose down the bottom there. And we've got Kildrummy here. Now, my mother's name is Morven. And this is the hill that she was in Scotland that she was named after. So it's not a particularly, it's actually, there are quite a few Scottish people who have it. And there's actually another woman called Morven Simpson. My mother's maiden name was Simpson. And she's actually a slightly more distant cousin. I can't remember exactly how she fits in, but it was quite strange to actually correspond with her and say, dear Morven, rather than dear mum. So, but anyhow, these are lots of different family places around here. I've got relations who come from Aberdeen, Alford, all sorts of different things here. And when I had my DNA done, it told me that I was part of a genetic community from this area, and that all seems to fit in beautifully with all the other records that I hold. So we talked about Montrose earlier on. We've got Lawrence Kirk up here where my grandfather lived, and then Stonehaven on the coast. And then in here, we've got Kildrummy. So the name means the little burial mound in Gaelic. And if you wanted to find out more about Kildrummy, places like familysearch.org are a great starting point, because they will actually tell you where all the records are held. So it will come up and tell you if the records exist for certain places and who actually has them. So I mentioned Kirk Session records, so it tells you which ones actually survive, and they're in the National Archives of Scotland in this case. It says there are old parochial registers here. Some of those may well be available on Scotland's People. So Family Search is a good starting point there for looking for records for Kildrummy. There's also another place called britishhistory.ac.uk. And looking on here, it gives me a lovely little description of what it was. And this was from a survey that was done. I can't remember the date offhand, it's 1800s. And it says that it's a tiny place with 627 inhabitants. And it had a castle, which is a ruin now. And it basically says that there are the parishes on either side of it. So you've got Auchindore and Cairn, which is, and Forbes and Alford. And I've got relations that come from all of those. So it's quite interesting to know how things relate to each other. So again, I recommend looking at britishhistory.ac.uk. And going back to the Aberdeen and North East Scotland Family History Society, I mentioned that they do lots of booklets and things, and they do things for the kirkyards. So the churchyards for the individual little churches there. Some of them, you're very lucky, they will have illustrations in them there, and they will tell you where people are buried. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And then within that, you can find particular ancestors. So in my case, this is a man by the name of Charles Taggart, who was a miller at the mill of Kildrummy. He died on the 3rd of April, 1865, and it mentions his children there and Jane Hosey, his wife. And then if I look back, he's number 41. I should be able to find number 41, which is 45, 44. It's around here somewhere. So if I wanted to then go and actually find the headstone, providing it still existed and was legible, hopefully I would at least find the place that it was supposed to be there. So I mentioned earlier on about having my spreadsheet, and I just wanted to actually show you a demonstration of that spreadsheet. Let's go into that. So this is how I've set it up. I've started off with my great-grandfather and with my grandfather at the top, and I've gone as far back as I can with his records, and then I've gone on to his mother and then her records, and then I've started to go on to all the other records there. And where it swaps, I've actually said what the relationship is between them. So Margaret is the mother of David Japp Simpson, so I know why I've got those there. I've got the occupations in here. So for example, one was a parochial beadle, who was parish official, a weaver and fewer. And if I go down here, I've got some of the Taggarts in here. This is a working document, so I will just add more information in here. But I've just found this being it helps show patterns. I found it really useful for doing that. So age of parent at birth, so you can see they were relatively old for having children there. My grandfather wasn't the first, he was the second son. There were 4 sons in his generation, but they didn't have children until their 30s, so in those days that was quite old. But going back a few generations, he was 20. This is useful for showing where people were born and died and when, how old they were when they married, how old they were when they died, what occupations they had, and how people relate to each other. And also I've used it in some instances to show where people were illegitimate, so you would know why a name changed. So sometimes it's very difficult to get past an illegitimate birth, and at least you can know that that might be a brick wall, albeit temporary. You might be able to get past it, but it's always useful to know that. And the parent, this was significant on my paternal side, because I don't know if anybody was listening to Caroline Rumpf, my one last time, where her husband was, shall we say, quite a lot older than she was, and he was in his 60s when his son was born. So if I hadn't had the information on that and verified it and put it down there, it would have made life quite complicated when looking for records, because it skipped a generation effectively because there was such a large gap between them. What helped me in my own research, a couple of years ago, I can't remember how I found out about it, but there was a transcription project that was run by the National Library of Scotland, and it was called the Roy Transcription Project. I'll show you what it's like. And this is the first map of Scotland. So basically, what you can do is you can zoom in, and it will actually show you what was recorded on here at the time. And when we did this, we used the side-by-side viewer, and we were comparing the old and new names. And this really helped with my Scottish geography, which wasn't particularly strong at the time. And so it was really useful to be able to say, right, this place existed, this place didn't exist. So have a look at that. It's a really nice map to look at as well. And it shows how little there was. You can see Montrose there, spelt slightly differently. And quite distinctly, there's an island there with no way across it. It might have been that the tides were different or something, and people could get across by wading because there isn't a bridge there. I'm a member of the Aberdeen and North East Scotland Family History Society, and they're a lovely group of people. Ivor is the one who runs it, and I've interviewed him on my podcast a while ago and spoken to him several times on the interim. And just, if you ever want to know more about a place you're interested in, where your ancestors live, look for the local Family History Society and join it, because there are so many enthusiastic local people. They know so much about the place. You might be related, you never know what will actually happen as a result of doing that. And I'll just show you their website. It's rather fun. And on here, you can see publications. So you can buy publications if you want to. You don't have to be a member. And it will actually show you all the different things that are on there. And if you do join, you can get access to the data bank. And they also do have a research centre that you can visit if you're ever up in Scotland. I've done quite a few Pharos courses, Pharos tutors, and Chris Paton is a very experienced family historian genealogist, excuse me, who has done several different courses on researching Scottish ancestors. And I always think that I learn loads through talking to people about things and taking courses, but also a lot of the sources aren't necessarily things that I would have considered looking at. So it's worthwhile having a look at some of the courses that he and other people have done. He specialises in Scotland and Ireland, but there are plenty of other courses that are available on there. And they're quite reasonably priced. They're around about £45, and they're a 4-week course, and you get lots of handouts and things like that. My spreadsheet for seeing patterns that I demonstrated to you just now. Collaborating with other people, I can't emphasize that enough. It's like talking to other people and seeing what information that they have and what you can share with them and they can share with you. The gentleman I mentioned in Canada, he is actually the husband of a distant cousin of mine, and he sent me through a couple of documents relating to an old directory which mentioned the Japp family in Montrose, and he sent me I already had the family tree, but he sent me that map which went back to Hugo. So that was really kind of him to do that. And see what information you've already got access to. So I said I inherited lots and lots of things from my grandfather, who was actually quite keen on his ancestors. I have to say I didn't speak to him that much when he was alive about them, but I was very aware that he was very proud of his Scottish roots. So recommendations for different tools and websites. As I said, Scotland's People is brilliant. It's free to look at things on there. You can find a lot of things via the indexes in there. If you want to actually subscribe, it works on a series. It's like you buy credits. So you buy £40 of credits is about 160 credits and about 6 credits to look at a document on there. Documents are things like birth, marriage and death certificates, census records and different things like that. If you're looking for records in Scotland, their records are better than England, and this website is better than English records. And if you want to find out, if you look at a death certificate, it will say who the person was married to, if they're married more than once. It will say their parents' details on there, when their parents got married. So you can make some big leaps by looking at information using that. So Scotland's People is definitely a website worth visiting. As I mentioned, the National Library of Scotland maps, there are loads and loads and loads of different types of maps on there. So that's the side-by-side viewer I mentioned. That's the Royal Military Study that we looked at. And then you can choose lots and lots of different options here. And it doesn't just cover Scotland, it covers the whole world. So have a look for your areas on there if there are particular areas you're interested in, because they may well be on there. The Aberdeen and North East Scotland Family History Society again. The British Newspaper Archive is a fantastic resource. And again, that's a paid one, but it's definitely worthwhile. You don't necessarily have to subscribe for the whole year, but it's amazing treasure trove of information. And the other links earlier on in this talk. And my spreadsheet to help spot trends. So that's it for my talk. Any questions?
That's just fabulous, Emma. Thank you. Wow, I am so charged up. Please, questions.
Does anybody have
given us all so many great ideas to go research and add to our bucket list of things that we want to do. So I've just taken crazy notes. Thank you so much.
I think if you're looking in Scotland, actually, you're really fortunate because the records are really, really good. They are better than in England. And as I said, look at things like death records, so look at things on Scotland's People, because you can look at the indexes, you can see the information there without necessarily having to buy the record, but sometimes it's a good confirmation. And another tip for you, sometimes you can end up buying a record and it might have more than one ancestor on there, because I've looked at something once and I bought it, and then I've gone back and looked for a different ancestor and found that I'd already bought it because it happened to be on the same page, because our ancestors didn't travel around that much. So you may well find the same family records on the same page of the parish register.
I just made a commitment to go through the notes that you will have in your slides to make sure to pull them out into the notes of the recording when I share it, so they just click right through. These are fabulous. I'm already excited about this, my own Scottish family.
Yeah, I'm happy to find out that I can use the maps, because that's what I use in Sweden. I always use old and new maps to pinpoint exact places for so that's good. At least I can use it. Hopefully they are there for Shetland as well.
It should be. I mean, it covers lots and lots of different places. And another thing to point out with they do other transcription projects. So it's worthwhile keeping an eye on their website and seeing if there's anything that you can help out with. I did another one. I did one which was Edinburgh. And basically they gave us this map of Edinburgh and said, you need to identify all the words on this map. So you need to note down where all these words are. So you're tagging them all. So you're tagging things like toilets, you're tagging fountains, you're tagging military encampments, all sorts of different things here. But it's really good to help with your geography and to actually put people into context, into the right places.
Yeah, that's how I work as well.
I just can't get over that global map from the for Scotland. What was the date on that map that was all stitched together?
The Roy one,
19th century. Yeah, 19th century at some point, right?
I think it goes earlier than that. 1747 to 52. So it's the first map of Scotland. And so does anybody know the origin, have you heard of the Ordnance Survey maps of this country, of Britain? So the Ordnance Survey, they're military maps. So ordnance being guns and ammunition and things like that. So they were done for military purposes. So to sort of see what the lay of the land was, who was where, what information they needed to record. And so this is one of the first maps, and it's called the Royal Military Survey. And then that eventually leads to things like the Ordnance Survey being set up.
We think of the word ordnance as referring to, like bullets.
Yes,
but this
correct.
is about
ammunition. Yeah,
ammunition.
Military.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, a quick question for you. Some of the resources that you suggested, including the British newspaper archives, I am continuing to research for a biography, a lady that was a pilot during World War II that's from the U.S. but was serving there with planes. And so that would be a good source to try to track down some information, news articles and things.
You get 3 articles for free on the British Newspaper Archive, so it's worthwhile having a look at that and seeing if there's anything there. Putting in the person's name. Bear in mind, it's all computer generated words on there, so you sometimes have to be a little bit creative about what you search for, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily pick up the right words, all the letters in a word and things like that. So you look at things and you choose, and if you subscribe, you can save them as bookmarks in folders, so you can then go back to them again afterwards and have a look at them. Okay. And if you have a MyHeritage subscription, I think as part of one version of it, I can't remember which one, you can get part of a subscription to the British Newspaper Archive.
Good to know. Thanks.
It occurs to me that there are 4 of you that I know of that are on this call who are in various forms, in my view, expert genealogists, and with insights that you have offered professionally or just as advice in your local area. Just, wow. How I happened to bump into you, Jude, which is what brought me this to mind when I mumbled off knowing that my family was from Yorkshire. And sure enough, you're an expert and were very gracious to help me with a few little pointers. How do people find experts in their areas?
Good starting point is AGRA. If you look up the AGRA website in this country, it's Association of Genealogists or Researchers in Archives, and it will tell you who is a specialist in a certain area. That's the place I would recommend starting with.
There is a professional association of genealogists I know here in the US, and maybe it's US and Canada. I wonder if they provide the same thing. Does anybody know?
Possible.
I would think that would be a key thing.
And in Sweden, you have you can contact any heritage association or genealogist association and ask the question, and they will point you in the right direction. But there's also endless amounts of online help, like forums and Facebook groups. So if you just Google, just when it comes to Shetland, my specific interest ends up on the last island to the northeast, which I can never pronounce correctly in Scottish, but Unst. UNST.
East.
So it's the last one, and
Right.
someone in New Zealand has roots there and is doing a blog and has loads of information. And I was writing in a question. I said, "Oh yeah, this person I found in my research as well," and there was just one sentence coming back. "Oh, that must be the Spences." She even knew the surname I was researching.
Wow.
But it's a place like, you know, my brother-in-law went there visiting, and he said that it's basically half of the population on the island are his cousins.
This app, Jen, as well, for finding a genealogist, the Association of Professional Genealogists.
That's what I was thinking of. Is that global or is that American or anything in particular?
I think it's global. I'm certain it covers America and Canada.
Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that I think is so interesting, and perhaps what's had me thinking about this is this all about that place effort, is how we don't talk about an English diaspora. We don't talk about a Scottish diaspora. We talk about it as African or something. Well, actually, over here in America, Canada, and the United States, New Zealand, Australia, and Pacific Islands everywhere, we have huge numbers of people who, you know, the roots might be back over there. And that's where the curiosity is. It's so far away. Go ahead, Kathy.
My question was, and thank you very much, Emma. I have a Scottish ancestry on my dad's side and have done nothing with that at all. So this was, I wrote whole pages of things. I'm looking forward to the links for all the ones I wrote down wrong. But the question I have is, I have on both sides of my maternal and paternal side, I have cousins who have started doing research and have things on Family Search. And I guess my question is, how do I, as for those of you who are already have done a ton of research, how does a person come lately to either offer help or to get involved with what's already been done?
You would start with doing your own.
Without offending people.
Yeah, do your own and do something so that you've got something to offer, because then you can link into what's already there. So research your own line back to your great-grandparents, whichever link goes in. And that's how I talk to lots and lots of distant cousins. It's like, I'm down this line. Which line are you down? Oh, I'll share my line with you and you share your line with me, sort of thing. And that's how you help each other. That's how you collaborate.
Good. Thank you.
That's a great point. You know, I know we always talk about how, you know, do your own research and how other people's research may be dubious, blah, blah, blah. But the point is so fundamental to all kinds of sharing and collaboration is do your end of the bargain and do your end of the bargain first. And I love the simplicity of it. Then you've got credibility and you've shown how you're willing to put the work in and you show the quality of your work. And then you're also sort of saying, this is the quality that I expect.
But you're also saying that you've done some research and you're fairly sure about that research and you are closer to things than they are, for example.
Yeah.
So it's like, I've got over 10,000 people in my family tree now, and I admit around the edges, it's like, it's guesswork. It's put things in place. And it's like, I don't know that line very well. And I'd love it if someone came to me and said, here you go. It's like brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I
it's
think one of the interesting things that happened years ago is I had started becoming interested in my maternal side, and my grandparents, as Barbara knows, were what they call in Canada, Hudson's Bay settlers. They came from England and came as settlers in 1929 to help populate the country, basically, was the program. And at some point, not only was I interested in it, but my cousin's wife got very interested in it, and another cousin was. So all of us had written to the Hudson's Bay archives, because there is an Hudson's Bay Company archives in Manitoba. And somebody, the person that received all these inquiries, wrote back to one of my cousins and said, you know, there's 2 other people, like in the last 6 months, have asked for this exact same document. So we're like, well, y'all get your act together and quit bugging us or something. So because it's
But
not
that-
like a big national museum, obviously. So, but
That
at least
can be
we were all
quite useful though,
interested, so.
Kathy, can't it? Because it can introduce you to other people you don't necessarily know, and
Who
sort
are
of
researching.
yeah, further distant cousins. Yeah.
These were all of us who all lived in the same city, so we obviously just needed to have coffee once in a while. But it was kind of funny when the person said, you know, really? Stop.
So we have a study circle in the Heritage Association in Riddarhyttan, where we do family research, and everyone is on different levels. I'm one of the helpers, the sort of expert helpers or whatever it's called. And one of the first sessions I was there, someone who was a beginner said, "Oh, does anyone have this and this person in their tree?" And half the room said yes. There you have where you can share, because, you know, you just throw out a name and there will be other people who are related to that person as well.
And they might have other records that you don't have, family heirlooms, all sorts of different things. And you might share more in common than you realize.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes a family name will have its own website or society.
Yeah.
You know, if you're very lucky. I know I was doing some research into one of the English aristocracy from the 1600s last year, I think it was. And there was a huge website, and it was in America, even though this was an English woman I was looking for. And it was incredible. They have a quarterly newsletter, very, very, very active.
Actually,
can I ask everybody a question now, actually, because I was talking about patterns in the tree. Have you noticed any patterns in your own trees?
Yes. But they differ depending on what line you look at.
Naturally, what sort of things?
So, for example, in a county called, or an area called Dalsland, they stayed in the same parish, and they were farmers, everyone. In Riddarhyttan, they were mainly miners and soldiers, and they didn't travel a lot until they started closing the mines. Then they started moving. Glass blowers, as well as smiths, they tended to travel a lot, except for my glass blowers, because they stayed in the same place until they started opening up their own glass works. So yes, pattern are important, and you can compare the different lines and what class status they have in society. That also affects how much they move about and what time it is. Are we talking the 1700s or 1800s or 1900s? When does people start emigrating? And for what reasons do they emigrate? That depends on when they emigrate. So by now, I assume that most of you would know that over 1 million Swedish people emigrated to North America during a certain time period. And at one stage, Chicago was I think the largest or second largest Swedish city, population-wise. So when you have those patterns and can see sort of, did people move because they wanted a challenge? They wanted to try something new? Was it more adventurous? Did they move because of famine or poverty? Or did they move because the working class movement were giving them more opportunities in North America than in Sweden? And so you pick up that. That's why it's important to take all the notes down, and if possible, also note down. So in Sweden, you had a state church for very long. Actually, when I was born, there was still a state church. It's not today. But if you keep that in mind, a lot of ministers would note in the church records if a family did not belong to the state church. Up to a certain point, it was illegal, but then it was legal at a certain point in the late 1800s. But also, a lot of people who belonged to free churches emigrated because freedom of religion. So you have the Mormons, you have the Baptists, you know, Presbyterians, all these different smaller churches, and a lot of them emigrated.
Yeah, you see that a lot in America. You know, just I was chatting with Karen here, is that in my own family, a whole lot of different lines. Talk about patterns. We're all Quakers. That's what they had in common. It's probably why they were marrying each other in the 17th, 18th centuries, and they were coming down, and there was a whole gaggle of Quakers who moved from New England down to North Carolina to hide from the English. And that it becomes a piece of American history also. Then there are scandals of people who married out of wedlock. There's a story told my family, the myth that's wrong is that we are related to Betsy Ross. We're not. Betsy Ross is Ross because she did marry a Ross, John Ross. He died. That's why she was the one who did the flag. But the scandal there was that her family was Quaker, his family was not. So they eloped. It's a great story, but it really feeds in to the whole religious emigres from Europe. And actually has a little color on the whole arguments here in the United States in this next election relating to being a Christian nation or not. When you look back at the history and the fights over that, it's pretty interesting.
It was interesting because you said we talked about patterns, and you also talked about children born outside of wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, I've spotted that pattern in some areas in Sweden, that when there is a child born outside of wedlock, quite often the dad bought a one-way ticket to North America and disappeared.
Yep. And possibly had a few more.
That was very common.
Yeah.
Such an interesting pattern on one line of my family. And women were all going down the line and laterally were widowed very young. And it really feeds into the story of social history.
Yeah.
And, and what was happening in a local context, with poverty and the kind of occupations the men had. And it really is a pattern.
Yeah. Not to mention illness.
Mm.
Yeah. And then there's the reverse side, which is childbirth, with men having multiple wives as the wives die in childbirth.
Mm. And in some cases marrying a sister or something, even though it was technically they shouldn't have done, and all sorts of different things. I've came across something, I can't remember, it's for a client, with one man supposedly married 3 sisters, one after the other. And it's like, okay, that makes for very complicated relationships.
By the way, I'd never heard that. I've learned recently the term spinster is simply a young woman who is not married. Okay. And the term relic, I had not heard that one before, as a term for a widow. Wow. Oh, and one more, a Davenport. I've heard the term Davenport to mean a couch, a sofa. But I didn't know it's what we would call a secretary desk, a small desk. And I just Googled it. And sure enough, I don't know if you can see it, but this is,
Barbara.
Huh? Sorry?
You have a Davenport.
Well, exactly. This desk that was my grandmother's. My cousin sent it to me not too long ago. It was a gift, I think, from my grandfather to my grandmother when they were engaged. And it's, I don't know much more about it. Aesthetic period Davenport. I didn't know the word Davenport. Sure enough, there it is. I'm so impressed.
I didn't either. So I am calling my daughter to go pull the drawers out of that desk that she bought that looks just like that. Somebody got it off of a yacht built in the 1920s that they were salvaging for the wood flooring. And it is just incredible. Same shape, drawers, everything. So I gotta go see if it's got Jap on it.
I don't know if you noticed, the typed letter from my grandfather was held down by a couple of ink pots. And so the ink pots are inside it. And there are actually some pens, some old quill pens and things in there as well. I've never tried using them. And there's a couple of old keys as well. I have no idea what the keys are for. They don't fit it. But,
is there a standard place that the name is put onto furniture? I always know to look under drawers, the bottom of drawers or something like that.
It's the most likely place, I would think. Yeah.
Or the back of it, depending on what type of thing it is. If
somewhere that's not visible, basically, in everyday use. It'll be hidden somewhere.
I'm not selling this one, that's for sure. Well, gosh, thank you so very much, Emma. This was a fabulous talk, as they all have been, inspiring in so many ways. We're in awe of your family and your family stories, and thrilled at how this has inspired us and, frankly, the people that we touch and share stories with as well. I want to remind everyone, including those of you watching this as a video, that we love to see the comments into the video itself. It's a way to continue these conversations. Emma herself will be continuing to monitor this as we look forward to her program again next month. As well,
2 months.
Oh, 2 months. That's right. There is a special. We are cheering Emma. Everybody pay attention in middle of September to say a great vacation.
I'm probably going to be in Italy, so I will not be doing one in September, but I will be back in October, when I'm going to be talking about journalists, novelists, and publishers.
Ooh, that's a great topic. That's a great topic. So watch for more of that. In between September and October, we have all kinds of things hopping over here in Projectkin, including the All About That Place series, which is not only a live series to complement the recorded series out of Britain that'll happen on Pacific time, but also recorded, but also a special members corner series of that'll encompass 2 months of cohorts to be released at the end of beginning September, to include both August and September. And I welcome both recorded talks as well as written pieces. And really, I don't know, test me. Who knows? I'd love to tell family stories. That's the whole idea. And I want to thank you all so much. Any last comments? Okay, then with that, we'll wrap it. Thank you so much. I'll stop the recording now.